So I really wanted to tackle an easy project. I needed a bit of a break, and I feel like that was famous last words. So hello, and welcome back to Ashley Main Makes. And today I'm hacking a 1940s blouse. So this came about in a couple of different ways. First of all being that I had made a second version of the Roseclair dress, and it already looked very 1940s. I had made it out of this Hawaiian print fabric and all styled up and everything. It really looked very vintage, very 1940s. So I thought we would take it a step further and really add some of those kind of hallmark details of the 1940s and really push it in that direction. If you've been around here for any length of time, you'll know what a pain, or maybe you've tried it yourself, it is to upsize a pattern and correct it, deal with a full bust adjustment, all that kind of stuff. So this gave me a really easy base to work off of, and this way we can just add some of the details we love. So today I'm not really shooting for any one particular exact replica. What I am taking is a bunch of different ideas off my Pinterest board and kind of giving it that 1940s spice. So I'm going to be adding that kind of forward shoulder seam along with that gathering, as well as doing some bust tucks that are all really great for doing this in the Rayon crepe of the era, and adding that little curved peplum as well, which is basically the pattern piece as it comes. So this was super easy to take it one way or the other. The sleeves already really read 1940s to me. So overall, this was a really easy hack. You could, of course, do this to some other pieces if you wanted. You could do it to just your standard bodice block or a button-down shirt. All of those would be really great. So feel free to hack these 40s details into a pattern you already have. But with all that being said, let's get into the pattern alterations. All right, so we're going to be starting with our modifications here. So first things first, we're going to do that iconic sort of forward shoulder seam. So all I'm going to do here, I think I'm going to use this notch, this forward notch here to be where my seam is going to be. That seems like a reasonable enough place. So I'm going to just move it up to there. Something like that. So that's where I want my seam to be. So I'm just going to add my 5/8 seam allowance along the top. So what I'm going to do is line up my front piece and my back piece and line up as best as you can. Obviously, I've made a million modifications to this pattern since my original version. And if I haven't mentioned it already, this is a traced copy of my final pattern that I did in that last video where I adjusted this Roseclair dress. So if you haven't seen that, go and watch that because that was quite involved. So we're going to attach our front and back together so that we can have that shoulder seam come forward. This will become my new notch right here because that seam is getting omitted. So all I'm going to do is cut that off. And then I'm going to add just a little piece to the back here. So I'm going to add back my 5/8 because if you take it away, you have to add it back in. Otherwise, you will lose the width of your seam allowance every time you are stitching them back together, which if it's as big as 5/8, that can add up really quickly. You just want to trim up the edge here. And remember, when you hit a point like this, you can go straight and then follow that angle. Just like that. If you wanted to leave the dart, you could leave it at that. I'm going to be turning my darts into tucks, and I'll show you that when we get to the more complex front. But for now, for the back, I'm just going to fold this where my dart legs are. So you can see where my dart legs are. I marked them down here. I'm just going to fold it along my dart leg, and then I'm going to fold it back the other way. Might just temporarily tape this down. I like to just kind of stick the tape on the back of my hand. That makes it less sticky if I want to remove it later. So yeah, that curve's looking pretty good despite making 17 versions of this. But I'm just going to trim this up. You can see how that still creates the curve in the paper. So this might be a little bit annoying. Cone shape, just in kind of a more loose way versus having this as a tight bodice. something like that. So that's the back complete. That one was nice and easy. Pretty close to the original, honestly. Now for the front, gets a little bit more complicated. So we're gonna spin some darts around and I'm gonna be turning it into gathers at this top end and tucks at this bottom end here. So we're gonna start with figuring out how much space we actually have to roll into this whole thing. So again, I've got my dart legs, my end points marked out here. This is where my dart originally ended. This is actually my apex point, and this is where my other dart ended. So I'm gonna try and decide how far apart I want these tucks. I think as a good start, it would probably be almost as wide as this would be. Yes, this is almost 2 inches. Yeah, that seems reasonable to have our 2 tucks about 2 inches apart. So I'm going to mark this in 1 inch away and 1 inch away. You could, of course, do gathers on both ends. If you didn't want to do tucks at the bottom and gathers at the top, this seems like the most quintessential 40s thing to me, so that's why I've been doing it this way. What we're going to do is I'm going to mark in my points here. Instead of marking in where my actual darts are, where they're backed off the apex, I'm going to go right to the apex. So I'm going to draw in just my original darts here. So that's the spacing that I'm going to need. So same thing on this side. I'm going to go right to the apex from my dart leg straight to my apex. And again, of course, you can do this on any pattern. I'm probably going to show you a bunch of different examples of how this is used. I think this would be really cool on like a button down or something like that. That's where I'm starting out with. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut my darts out. And I'm going to go just shy of that point, just so that I leave a little bit of a paper hinge at the tip there, so that this whole piece doesn't come falling apart. I might even, before I go too far, I might even stick a little bit of tape on the bust point. I find that helps a little bit keep this whole thing from just combusting entirely. Yoink my dart out. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. Yeah, I might even just swing this closed here on this one. So I'm just gonna cut up to that apex there. Up here, we're gonna make a few connecting lines for our gathers. Again, you could do this on the bottom too. Let's just double check here. I'm gonna mark 5/8 inch away because that'll be the end of our gathers. That's all gonna get caught up in the seam allowance. Obviously I have really narrow shoulders, so it doesn't give me a lot of real estate to work with. So I want all my gathers to end up in this seam here. I'm gonna go probably just 3 lines here because we're gonna want to make this a smooth kind of curve in the end. Doesn't have to be, there's not really any rhyme or reason to this. You're just trying to split it up into more than one gather. You can do this in many different ways, but the main point is you're just trying to recreate that cone of the bust in a different manner. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut down these lines that I just made. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to do, probably should have done this first, then I started doing it. I'm going to mark in my other tuck line. So again, those lines at the top could be tucks or they could be gathers. Same with these lines at the bottom, they could be tucks or they could be gathers. Again, we're just moving that cone around in different ways, depending on like what your fabric is, because I'm working with crepe and it's a little bit heavier. We have some advantage. So I'm also going to cut up these lines here. You're going to say, Ashley, you're just making ribbons out of your pattern at this point. What I'm going to do first is just close up this bottom dart here. So instead of 1 bottom dart, I'll now have 2. Tuck darts, same thing. You could turn this into 2 darts if you wanted. I'm going to be turning it into 2 tucks in my case. Again, just because I'm working with crepe. But yeah, again, gathers, tucks, darts. I feel like tucks feels very vintage to me. That's kind of why I'm doing this. Again, probably should have left some like I did on my side dart. It's been a while. Good enough. I'm going to do the same thing to this honk inside dart. I'm just going to close it up. So we'll no longer have the big honkin' side dart, which is amazing. I dislike the big honkin' side dart. Trim that up. I'll probably trim up the back afterward. No, maybe we'll do it now. So now we can decide how much space we want to go into each area, regardless of my ribbons being just left. I should have left that as one piece here. So we can see what this looks like here. Something like that. That seems fairly reasonable, like that. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And now I'm gonna have to go and find some scrap paper, and we're gonna fill this in and tape this all up and be back in a second, and then we'll show you how we mark this guy. Okay, so I got this all taped up now, so I think it's much easier to see what the heck's going on. So you can see it's pivoted from this dart point. Now, if we want to turn these into darts, we would have to back this off again and redraw these, but we're not worried about it. We're just gonna pretend they don't exist for the most part. If I was gonna transfer this to another copy, I would wanna mark in basically where these dart legs end. Obviously, if I keep it on here, I'm probably not honestly gonna trace this out again. I'm being lazy. But I would wanna mark where these are. Now, this top part, like I say, I'm gonna turn this into gathers on this particular version, but I'm probably gonna wanna know those for the future. I think it'd be fun if I was doing this out of a heavier material to do it with these tucks in the top, so probably just gonna leave them so I can mark them in later. But all I'm gonna do is curve these off now, because we're not looking for a sharp point, and I'm just going to basically the highest point of my curve here, just kind of curving the ends of this off so we don't have like a big jagged line. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So I'm going to curve this out here as well. So that's our finished piece, and there's our moved darts and everything. So we're basically good to go now. So our 40s hack is complete. Oh, one more thing. I need to add back my seam allowance here. That would have been bad. That would have been a bad time. Glad I remembered. Now our piece is complete, so we are good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out. So the only other change I'm gonna make to match my inspirations is probably to curve this front piece here. I haven't quite decided what that's gonna look like. So it would be 5/8 down, of course, for our seam allowance, and then some sort of curve off. Maybe something like that. I think I'm probably going to do this on the fabric stage, maybe so I can see what it looks like before I go too far with it. But yeah, so I'm gonna move on to cutting out from here, and this is pretty easy because this pattern was already fitted. So one advantage of doing all those fittings is I really want to take advantage of that pattern that already fits me so well. So we're gonna go from there. I'm excited. And we're gonna work on cutting out our beautiful rayon crepe. So I have my fabric here, and it is this beautiful rayon crepe, which is the perfect substrate for this project. Rayon crepe is a very 1940s fabric. They used to use it, calling it artificial silk, and it came out during that time period. So literally everything was made of it. That's why you see so many kind of drapey garments. Pattern feels very of 1940s to me. I don't know about this color palette. Maybe a little bit 80s does 40s, but I feel like it's the perfect vibe for testing out this pattern. Rayon crepe is a little bit hard to find nowadays. Rayon challis is a lot more common, which would work great for tops or that sort of thing if you wanted to make a top like this. The other option would be to use something like a rayon twill. That's another really great option, especially if you wanted to make this into like a dress, full-length dress version. That would be really nice. This one isn't quite as flowy and is a little bit denser than it probably should be because this has actually already been starched. I did this in one of my early videos where I actually starched this piece of fabric. And if you haven't seen that video, you could go back and watch it, although I am pretty awkward. But yeah, if you'd like to see another video on how I starch my rayon, please feel free. I'm thinking about doing another one where I'll actually make my own starch. But yes, this has a little bit heavier body than it probably should. So I'm just going to go through the pieces here for what I've got for this top. So I have my back, which is unchanged. My front, which, like I say, I might round off a little bit on this front corner. I haven't quite decided what that's going to look like. I have that front piece we just altered, the back we just altered, and then the standard short sleeve for this pattern, because that also looks very 40s to me. Now, I'm probably going to skip the bias binding around the neckline just because this crepe is so wiggly when it's not starched. And I'm probably just going to use some bias binding. I have this left over from the walkway dress and I'm still trying to get rid of this giant roll. And then I'll probably make a set of 2 ties out of this piece and interface them so that they don't stretch out. I was having a lot of problems with my last one where the ties would stretch out because they were on the bias. So yeah, so cut this knot on the bias and we're going to cut 2 of them instead of 1 and interface them. That's just my personal preference, but you could definitely do it the other way, or if you're making this out of cotton, same thing. But yeah, so I'm just gonna go ahead. I might actually cut this on the flat maybe, just because it is so wiggly, and then we will go from there. So I did go ahead and end up cutting that curve right on the fabric. In hindsight, I definitely would have cut a new pattern piece and done it on there, because I did end up really liking that curve that I ended up with. But then I'm going ahead and finishing all my edges on my serger. You could, of course, do French seams, but this crepe was really wiggly, and I thought if they would have had a serger, they would have used it. And then I'm going to go ahead and interface my ties. So we're going to be jumping around a lot here in this video. I was having a lot of sewing machine problems, and honestly, I've showed the making of this dress before, so we're just covering kind of the highlights and the changes that I made that I did differently. So I'm using this rolled interfacing here, and this was definitely a Gertie thing, but I do really love it for doing ties and edges like this. You want to make sure that you are interfacing any sort of rayon on a pretty low setting, because the rayon will not like it and will scorch. But this was a really easy way of me kind of measuring out the ties, because it turned out to be the perfect size for it. And so I'm just going ahead and ironing it backwards, basically, like ironing it flat, so that the interfacing is on the outside and we can sew it up, and turn my tubes around, and then just cutting off the excess using that interfacing as kind of a guideline. You could, of course, just use regular interfacing. That's no big deal. And now I'm throwing in the gathering stitches in that shoulder. So I just did 1, and now I'm doing the other, just the widest stitch length possible, leaving a good amount of tails. And I'm just pulling on those bobbin threads here to put in that gathering. Now, you want to make sure you get this really nice and even, because the more even this is, it's going to be how your shoulder seam is and how even those gathers are once they're sewn in. So I'm spending a little time here doing that. And then I'm sewing my shoulder seam together. Just normal stitch here, again, because I serged those edges, which made it really nice and easy. Sewing, sewing, sewing. Trying not to sew too much over my pins. And now I'm using this double fold bias binding. And so I'm using it to finish all my edges. Again, very retro technique. And honestly, I had so much binding, why not? So I'm just sewing it along all my edges one way. I probably would have used single fold interfacing if I would have had any, like, instead of this double fold, because it did get a little bulky later on, but it is pretty thin because it is pretty cheap bias binding. So, you know, you do you. You could definitely use like the lace binding. I did that on that previous Hawaiian one. That's also an option. But I'm just using it to go around the curves and using my iron to kind of shape it back into place. And then I'm going to be stitching that back on, doing a little top stitching here. This is on the actual bodice pieces to tack that in place behind the seam. And now I'm attaching actually my front to the bottom peplum here. Now that it's all in place, it's coming together really fast. Like I say, I'm skipping over some steps here because you would have seen it in that previous video. And like I say, the sewing machine acting up, driving me crazy. So this is that 1961 Singer. So hopefully we'll see it in more videos if I can get it fixed. It was honestly driving me to madness, but hey. So I'm just coming off my bias binding here. You can see how I've had it folded all the way out flat. And then I'm going to iron it flat out and then put that fold back in. And then that way all the seams are tucked away and everything is firmly in there. Gives you a really ultra clean finish. And now I'm just going around those tubes from earlier. I don't know why I waited till this point, but hey, you know, you do you. And I'm just trimming around that corner to get rid of the extra bulk so I can get a nice clean corner. And I'm going to be turning this tube back around. And this is about where the machine died entirely, and so I didn't film any more than this. But I hope that gives you a good idea of kind of just some of the extra steps I did. Honestly, the Roseclair instructions are pretty good, so the rest of this is pretty straightforward. But if you have any questions, do leave them in the comments. And yeah, we're just pulling out a nice big tube. I did use my safety pin trick here to pull the tube out, and then I'm just flipping out those corners, making sure it's nice and crisp. And those are my ties. And I will go ahead and top stitch these as well after, just to hold this all in place so that they don't rumple in the wash. And here's the final reveal. Honestly, I really do love this. I love the way it came together. I just think it is actually really elegant. It really fits my vision. And I think it really reads 1940s. I did actually like it a little bit better when it still had the starch in it, so you could definitely add shoulder pads in it to amp up the 1940s factor if you want, but I am excited to make a lot more versions of this. I am wearing it here with a 1950s style skirt, just because of the green went so well. I love the green color with it, but I honestly think it would look better with a little bit of a narrower skirt. Similar to the View B that actually comes with the Roseclair dress, so you could make this, of course, into a dress version, or you could just use the back pattern piece and double it up to make yourself a matching skirt to go with. I didn't quite have enough fabric for that either, so we're skipping it today, but I'm definitely excited for this, and I'm excited to make a bunch of different versions of this because I think this would be a great wardrobe staple, especially if you're starting your vintage wardrobe. So if you have enjoyed this today, please do let me know if there's any particular eras you would like me to tackle. Even some other 1940s pieces, I really enjoyed looking at them. And please hit that like button down below. It would really help me out, as well as subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. I'm trying to hit 2,600 by the end of the month, and I would really love if you would join me. So with all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys!